I'm just up here to tell my side. Wake up at about 8 o'clock the next morning. I'm lying on the couch and I look at this guy's down there on the floor. He's in his underwear and he's not looking really good. I said, "Who are you?" He says, "I'm Tom Girard." He's looking up at me. And I says, "Tom, let's have a beer." So I get up and I wander in, pull a couple beers out of the refrigerator. Meanwhile, when I had gone to the refrigerator, he found a little chess set that I had, a little plastic one that was over on one of the tables. And he set it up there on the floor. I was reaching down, he was there, and we probably drank, a dozen beers and played chess until noon, 1 o'clock. I never beat him. You know, Tom is he's smarter than everybody. You know, Tom was just a brilliant guy. And that was the first meeting of Tom Girard. I may have met him earlier in the party, but there was a lot of people there. I think you were there, Marilyn.
I was there.
I think it was the one that we put the refrigerator box in the center. This is how dumb we are in college. The refrigerator box in the center of the living room, and as you finish your beer, you toss it into the box. Well, of course, there's always a half an inch of beer left in the thing, and so I lost track of Tommy. Tommy was in the Navy at that time. He wasn't going to the university. I think he knew Mike McDevitt. That's how Tom made the party there. Tom in the Navy, they didn't really like each other, and they were probably happy when he got out. I'm sure he was happier when he left. I ran into Tom a couple of years later up in Newport Beach. Tom had gotten his pilot's license and he was selling airplanes, and then he got into selling aircraft insurance with Billy Schwartz. I don't think I called Billy. Billy was a good buddy, crazy. The two of them were really crazy. But Tom loved to fly his airplane, and I can remember once we were flying down to San Diego, and I said, "Tom, one of these days I'd like to learn how to fly an airplane." He says, "Oh, flying an airplane is easy. Blue is up, brown is down, and if you're flying at night, you put a tie on." I said, "That sounds funny." And he says, "Well, when the tie's in your face, you know you're upside down." Those are the flying lessons that Tom Girard wanted to give me. A couple of years later, actually, I was married to my first wife, Tina, and she got to be friends with Tom's wife, then Bonnie. And Saturday afternoon, we go over to Tom and Bonnie's house. Girls wanted to go shopping, but I had two little kids, one about 3 and the other about 4 or 5. And Tom and I were sitting there, we're watching the football games on Saturday afternoon. Girls are gone, and the kids are being nasty, so Tom suggested, "Let's lock them in the bathroom." So we're sitting there, half an hour later, all of a sudden we see all of this water coming out underneath the bathroom door. The kids had found Bonnie's favorite Kleenex collection that she had. They all had the little things that matched all of the different bathrooms. And the kids were dumping them into the toilet, flushing, and they were having a great time. But the toilet didn't like that. I could go on for hours. These are just some of the stories. Here's another classic. Bonnie had already had found out about Tom, figured him out, and she had left. So Tom had this other girlfriend, Barbara, Bonnie, I don't know what her name was. But anyhow, nice, sweet, cute. Oh, what a nice girl, lived in Huntington Beach. And Tom was really enamored with her, but she didn't understand Tom Girard. Thanksgiving morning, Tom calls me up and he says, "John, I've got a couple of my Australian friends flying into LAX. All I have is my little Porsche. I can't pick them up. Will you drive?" Sure enough, Tom. So we go up to LAX, 8, 9 o'clock in the morning, pick up the boys, and of course these Aussies have been on this airplane for 18 hours. They're hungry, thirsty, and they needed some exercise. So we thought we'd drive down along the coast, got to Manhattan Beach, found a bar open, on Thanksgiving morning, and went in to have a couple beers and shoot some pool. And if you're ever drinking with Aussies, if you buy them around, they're automatically buy you around. And then, we try to keep up international relations, so we fly them around. Well, about 2 o'clock, Tom calls his girlfriend and says, I don't know where we are. And he comes back in and he says, my girlfriend Barbara, her little brother's there, her folks are coming over, and she's cooking Thanksgiving dinner. It starts at 4 o'clock. And I says, well, Tom, we can leave. And he said, no, we still have some money left in our pocket. So about 6 o'clock that night, we ran out of money, we drive back, and Tom never saw this girl again. She would never talk to him, there was nothing. That was kind of a quote. But, that was, Tom was not a ladies' man. Or at least I never met him to be a ladies' man. Okay, then one more, you call it, you're ticking me. I'm getting warmed up here, I could tell Girard stories all night. Tom moved over to Vegas, and one of his first jobs was the bar manager at the Royal Hotel or something like that, Royal Inn. And after about a year there, all of a sudden Tom gets evicted. He's told that he's out of there. He can't be in Vegas anymore. And that was kind of strange because I know Tom. Tom's an honest guy. But anyhow, Tom says I'm going to Vegas or going to Hawaii. So I go to Hawaii with them to see if we can find an apartment and all the rest of it. I'll swing back to the problem in Vegas. Actually, his successor, the bar manager, also had the same problem with the percentage, and they figured out it was really the cash register, and so Tom was exonerated. But he was having a good time over in Hawaii. One of his girlfriends shows up one day with a little baggie of stuff. So that evening, Tom and I tried some of it out. And of course, we got hungry. And so Tom says, I know a little Italian restaurant. It's down the alleyway. Just let's walk on down there. So he and I, about 7, 8 o'clock at night, dark, we're walking along the alleyway. And we said, there's alligators in there, and there's sharks, and there's eels. And so there's two grown people. We couldn't walk. The alleyway's over here. And we're way over here. And we're almost like single file walking along, just thinking that if we ever get close to the alleyway, that the crocodiles will be jumping out and getting us. We did get to the Italian restaurant, and Tom opens it up, and he says, "They got spaghetti and meatballs," and he just starts laughing, And I said, "Oh well, look, I got minestrone soup over mine," and I'm laughing away. And then we looked at the waiter, and he's laughing too. We said, "Hey, you think spaghetti and meatballs is funny?" Yeah. Well, they fed us quickly and got us out, and of course we had to take a cab home because we didn't want to deal with the crocodiles any longer. Okay, am I getting the boost? You really got to stop. There's a park down the street. You can walk around the park. You can exercise. Let's stop the drinking. And Tom said, "Oh, you're right. I'm going to do that." Tom couldn't wait till I got out of town because the only walk he ever took was back to the bar. Now, okay, my last story.
No.
We promise. Tom and I were, Sally and I went over to Vegas last November because I knew Tom was not doing well. Well, I just remembered another story I gotta bring in. Okay, I get going it off. Anyhow, John Girard was there, and Tom's favorite bartender was there, and we all show up at Tom's little bar, and Tom had cleaned himself up, absolutely looked great. John said, "This is the first time I've seen him all cleaned up," and so he cleaned up for his buddy John and Dirty Sally. But halfway through the evening, he says, "John, you gotta take me home. I gotta go get my album." Brings the album back to the bar, and this is the album of his grandson graduating from Annapolis. And I think Kelly is going to talk about that later, so I'm not going to get into that. But he was really happy about it. Okay, let me finish up. But those are all stories about Tom and and our party mode. But the one thing about Tom you got to remember is he had this nice thing about always wanting to help people. I can remember he was helping TC. TC had a bad case of cancer. Tom took care of him, brought him to San Diego, had him treated. You know, and then there was the bald-headed bartender that he took care of too. I can't remember his name, but Tom had this real sweetness about him. Did a nice thing for my wife. So anyhow, I think it's time for me to give up before I get thrown out of here.
Okay, thank you. The beachcomber and tell them to come and get Lyle and Tommy in LA Bay. Somebody go get an airplane. So they did, and Tony Gillum showed up the next day. We got drunker than shit at LA Bay, got in the airplane, and Gillum says, you know how to get back, and Tommy says, follow the highway, but don't go through the mountains. There's no place to land there. So when we got to the Brownfield and we landed with Tommy, our executive jet pilot, he landed on the tarmac. That means he missed the runway by about 100 feet. That's Tommy's airplane story for now. So now we're going to hear from Jean Marie, Tommy's niece. Where is she? Here she comes. Come on up. Over here.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Tom Girard's niece, the favorite one. Hallie Loving's daughter, Char Girard's niece. Do I have to eat it? Tom Girard's niece.
Favorite niece.
Favorite niece. I hope there's no others here. First of all, I want to thank everybody for being here tonight. It just means a lot to our family, and I just wrote a little something down, not expecting to have to say it in front of all of you, but this is just something I wanted to, for my uncle. Uncle Tom, we're not gathered together in a gloom-filled room. There's no heads bowed low for you. We're having a wake in the Pennant Bar because we know you'd want us to. You've taken the journey we all must take. We take comfort, and we know you're now reunited with your brother Tony, your mom and dad, and many others that have gone before us. We miss you, and we're letting you go, but you will be in our hearts forever. Thank you so much. And we had such good times together. That's terrible. I'm Char, Tom's youngest sister, and I know there are a lot of you out there saying, God, I never knew Tom had a sister. I was happier, but Tom would introduce me to somebody.
Helene wants me to say that she's the dumbest sister. It is true. I want to thank all of you for coming. Marilyn and your crew have been unbelievable what you did here today, and we're delighted to know that Tom had such good friends. Wild, maybe. Good friends. And for John and Halveen and myself, and especially for Kelly. Those of you who have known Tom recently know that she truly was the love of his life, and the boys, and they really are. And thank you all for being here.
Be cool. He used to hang out at the bench at 4 o'clock in the morning. Woo! Where's Pam? Pam.
Pammy!
Where'd you come?
Come on down, Pammy!
If you're going to read all that, I'm going to go get another drink.
I really didn't ever hang out with Phoenix too much.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, Pam.
Okay. They actually took me down right about the time I moved to San Diego. Anyway, I have to read mine because otherwise I'll never be able to get through this. Most of you knew my late husband, Herb.
Tom was a very important person in Herbie's life, and of course, became so in mine. When Herbie and I got married in 1990, it was like marrying 8 guys. Eight guys were there all the time. And of course, Tom was one of them. There are 2 or 3 others in the room, by the way. Glad to see you guys. Anyway, if Herbie was here, I'm sure he'd have many stories to share with you about Tom. He would go on and on, just like John did. But one of them, and somebody may be able to help me with this later on in the evening, probably at least one of them would have had to do with their many trips to Hawaii. And I'm not sure if maybe that was because Tom was living there or whatever, but Herbie told me was, he took people on tours in Hawaii and Herbie had to help him. That's what they... Anyway, consequently, I never got to go to Hawaii because by the time I met him, he'd been there way too many times. I never got to Hawaii. One of the first things that I remember about Tom was his mobile phone. They didn't call them cell phones back then. Some of you will probably remember it. It was really big. And he reminded me of Maxwell Smart with his shoe. I guess he was so important at Caesar's Palace that they had to be able to contact him at all times. Either that or they thought he was really down the street and he was over here, but you know. Another thing I remember about Tom was he was so organized. He loved to tape programs on TV, mostly movies, but surprisingly, cooking shows. He had a gazillion tapes, and they were all labeled and very orderly and logged in a little black book. He had a phone in every room, along with a pair of glasses. One of the reasons he needed the glasses was to do crossword puzzles. I've heard from a very reliable source that he could do the Sunday New York Times crossword puzzle in about half an hour. When Tom lived here in South Mission Beach, he had this great idea to open his own little casino. I'm not going to go into a whole lot of detail about that, but we did have some great times with he and Walt and TC. I even won a little money once in a while. But then Mike Vaughn called him and offered him the job of movie critic at the Gold Coast. So back he went to Las Vegas. A few years later, we were very happy to hear about Tom's new family. If I remember correctly, he got tickets for the Chargers 49er game, and Kelly and her family came down. We got to meet them at the Camel's Breath. We've been there before the game. Tom was so excited to have us come meet them. He was so proud of them, and we're so happy they finally got together. I will miss Tom very much, but I like to think that he's up there with Herbie and all of their other friends, keeping an eye on us and having just the one.
Well, back in the 70s when Tom and I were really hitting it, he used to come down from Vegas in the 80s and he'd come and move into my house from time to time. And we would find ourselves over at the bench at about 3 o'clock in the morning, and he would call for help, and Marilyn showed up.
That's news to me. I have to stand up here so you can see me and hear me. Tom Girard had timing. He had the magical timing that comedians aspire to. Do you remember the white deer that used to live in Presidio Park? I never did see the white deer myself, but from the moment I heard about it, I watched for it every time I was near Presidio Park. Tom was riding down Interstate 8 with an old friend of ours named Rich Butler. They got to Presidio Park, and Butler was telling him all about the white deer that lived in Presidio Park. And as they were driving down Interstate 8, Tom says, "Oh, do you mean that one?" And there he was. Tom Girard had timing. One day, he was visiting some friends up in Tahoe City who are here today. Snake is here someplace. He and Snake
and some other guys were tubing down the Truckee River. Snake noticed that Tom's inner tube was gradually running out of air. He was slowly sinking lower and lower in the water. Tom didn't appear to notice nor worry about his predicament. But just as his inner tube lost its last breath of air and sank beneath the water, Tom stood up, gestured toward the riverbank. Some kid on the riverbank flung his own inner tube to Tom. Tom cut it, put it under his ass, and continued down the river. Tom Girard had timing. If Tom's timing was ever off, it was a calamity. Tom joined the Navy, and in 1963, he came home from a long deployment to Japan. After leaving the ship, he just rushed on home. The old house looked great as he rounded the corner. But when he opened the door and stepped inside, something seemed amiss. He didn't recognize anything in that house. Every article in the room was not familiar. He went into another room and there stood a couple of strangers. "Who are you?" he asked them. "What do you mean, who are we? Who the hell are you?" the man asked him. Tom's parents had moved, but they had neglected to tell Tom. He asked this couple he didn't know, "Do you know where they went?" And they said, "We have nary a clue." Imagine John Girard's disappointment when Tom eventually tracked them down. Tom was a friend you could count on when you needed help. Once when I was going to a wedding shower and I couldn't find a babysitter for my then 6-year-old son Sean, I asked Tom if he would help me out. And he said, not only would he babysit, but he would take Sean up in his airplane and let him fly the plane. Sean was really excited about this excursion, so I took him out shopping. And I didn't have any money, but I spent $30 on a new outfit. He had on long pants that were striped and a t-shirt to match. And I dropped him off at Tom's, and Tom said, "Come on back when you're finished." After the shower, I walked upstairs to Rich Butler's apartment, which was right out here on the bay. And there was Tom and Herb and Butler. But there was no Sean. "Where is Sean?" I asked. "Oh, he wanted to go swimming," Tom replied. At this point, Herb and Butler started chuckling. "But I didn't pack his swimming suit," I said. "How could he go swimming?" "Oh, I fixed that problem," Tom deadpanned. And I looked around and then noticed out Butler's window that way across the sand, out all by himself at 6, was Sean, wading in about 3 feet of water, and he looked like he had a swimming suit on. I dashed down the stairs and across the sand to get him, thinking that even any good babysitter would never be upstairs with a child in the bay. But how nice it was of Tom to have gone to the trouble to buy him a bathing suit. But the closer I got, the more familiar that bathing suit started to look. Tom had taken scissors to his $30 pants, cut them off at the knees, and that was his bathing suit. Sean didn't care about his bathing suit. All he cared about was a little black logbook that Tom had given to him, commemorating his first time piloting an airplane. Years later, Tom and I had been roommates over at Bonnie's house over here on San Gabriel, the Blue House. And then we were moving out and going our separate ways. I was moving into the little house behind the liquor store, and he was moving into the much larger house that Steve Billings owned down at the street. I asked Tommy if I could store some of Sean's keepsakes, which were in a couple of great big cardboard boxes. He said, of course, no. But then he said, okay, after I pestered and pestered, he said, okay, I'll look and see what you've got. And I dropped them off, and a couple of days later, I was up at his house, and he said, oh, by the way, you can keep your boxes at my house. And I said, well, what made you change your mind? And he said, look at this. And he got into one of the boxes. By this time, Sean was in law school, and it was years, maybe 20 years later. And here was that little logbook that he had given to Sean the day he cut his pants off. And Sean had kept it all those years. So Tommy was really touched by that, and I got to keep my boxes in his garage as long as I wanted to. I knew Tom Girard for 50 years, and that is a long time to be friends with anyone. He had become fast friends with my husband Chuck, and we have been saddened by his death. And I liked what a dear friend of ours who's here today, Lisa Coombe-Hill, said when she heard of his passing. She said, Tom was such an amazing character who seemed to have a sort of wisdom about life and people that made him special. She said that having a celebration for Tom's life was so fitting because he was so good at celebrating it. Lisa, I thought you hit the nail on the head. Tommy was an amazing character who knew how to celebrate life at most every turn. I guess what I would like to say about this man is that for Chuck and me, the fact that there is now a world without a Tom Girard in it just doesn't seem right. We feel as though a brilliant light has just been put out, and I wish that we could turn it back on. Pat Robinson brought 200 packs of cards from Las Vegas, and I don't know how many pens, and we'd like to thank you so much for that. And he wants you to take everything home, and I would like you to take the flowers home. So if you want to, maybe play a game of cards to see who gets those flowers. Anyway, thank you for coming.
Thanks, Johnny. Where's brother John? John Girard. Come on up here.
Get up.
Come on, dirtbag. Get up here.
I don't like this.
For just the one. For just the one. No Girard never died alone, I'll tell you that. So I'm going to ask you if you want to say a couple of things. At least something. Just one thing.
Where's my award?
You came in fourth place and we only went 3 deep.
I put up with the guy for 56 years. 56 years. Anyway, it was a long struggle. One story about Tom Girard. He talked me into buying a Porsche Cabriolet 1965. He was in the car business at the time. And I said, God, how can we do something like that? He said, oh, don't worry about it. We'll take care of it. So, sure enough, I have a yellow Porsche Cabriolet 65, and he has a red Porsche Cabriolet. He lives over in the valley with Bonnie, his first wife, and I live in Los Angeles. He would commute over Laurel Canyon. And so one of our close friends, a guy named Mike Kinney, they used to tip a few over by the studios. And Tom gets over in Hollywood with Mike Kinney, and they decide to drive Tom's car back to Bonnie's house on Saturday night. And they've had a few. So they're driving through Laurel Canyon in this Porsche Cabriolet. One car's going one way and one car's going the other. And they sideswipe each other coming down the canyon. Well, the guy that hits Tom keeps going, and Tom, who he had hit, keeps going over into the valley. So now they wake up the next morning, Bonnie's asleep, and this friend of ours, Mike Kinney, says, Tom, what are you going to tell your wife? You just got this Porsche. What the hell are you going to tell her about? Let's go look and see what the damage is. They go out in the front yard, and they look at it, and the whole car is wiped out at the side. And Tom said, what are you going to tell Bonnie when you just bought this car? And he says, I'm going to tell her the truth. A couple of cars kissed in the night.
And then the event and look at all of your faces because you're such a cross-section of humanity. And I've known some of you for 50 years and some of you for 50 seconds and 50 minutes. But we all knew Tom. So one of the greatest things that ever happened to him was when he discovered his family. Here's Kelly.
My name is Kelly Clark. I just have to say that when I met my father 12 years ago, it was like putting together pieces of a puzzle, and hearing all these stories are like putting together pieces of a puzzle. Because I have to say, I was in trouble my whole life. I was adopted, and my parents were from the Midwest, from a little farming community, and they could not understand why I did the things I did, and now I know why. I was restricted my whole childhood. It was awful. But I have to say, one of my fondest memories of my father was him showing up for my son's graduation from the Naval Academy at Annapolis. And I spoke to him of the event coming up, and he told me that he was going to make it. But with my dad, I mean, I never knew whether he'd actually show up or not. And I always told him, you know, if he could make it, he did, and if he didn't, he didn't. But he called me. I just showed up. We were in Washington, D.C. It was in the morning, and my whole family and part of my husband's family, we were all there. We were sightseeing. And he called me about 10 o'clock in the morning, and he said, "Guess what, I'm here." And I'm like, "Okay." I go, "Where are you?" And he goes, "Well, I'm at O'Brien's in downtown Annapolis." And I said, "Well, Dad, we just got to Washington, D.C., and we're sightseeing for the day." And he goes, "Oh, don't worry about it." And I go, "Well, where are you staying?" And he goes, he goes, "Call me when you get back into town, sweetheart." And I said, "Okay." So we did our sightseeing for the day. We showed back up. We got back to our house, and I called him again, and he said, "Well, I'm still at O'Brien's. Are you coming here?" And granted, this is like 8 or 9 hours later. And I said, "Yeah, Dad, we're going to be there." And I go, "Okay, we got to get to O'Brien's. My dad's been there all day, and his voice sounds different now." So we hurry up, and we get changed, and we go to O'Brien's in downtown Annapolis. And there he is. He has his little carry-on bag right next to him, sitting at the bar. And he was friends with everyone in the bar. When we showed up, it's like he'd lived there his whole life. He was friends with the bar. He introduced us to everybody there. And he told me, he goes, "Is Scott showing up?" And I go, "Yeah, Scott's back at the base, and he's gonna meet us here. I talked to Scott. He's gonna meet us here." So we were all there, and Scott ends up walking from the base. It was right down the street from the base, and he shows up, and Scott walks in, and he goes, "Scott, if any of your kids from the company, if they show up here," he said, "I'm buying everybody a drink." He goes, "Anyone from your company who shows up, we're getting a drink." Well, just then, a busload of kids from Scott's company, and I'm not kidding, it's a busload, they hop off the bus, they get in there, and they all have t-shirts on, they're doing a bar hop, and 40-something boys from this company, they show up, and he buys every one of them a drink. And I go, "Can you believe it?" He did a toast to my grandson, Scott Clark, the Admiral. The Admiral. He did a toast to him, and he bought every one of those kids a drink, and they all cheered to my son, Scott Clark, who's not here tonight. He's on deployment right now. But my dad said, "Don't worry about it. It's all in John's card." So we had a great time, and my dad was certainly
I had the pleasure of Tommy's friendship for more than 40 years, and if I knew that he had a daughter this good looking, I would have brought my sons around a lot earlier. Thanks, Gil. Okay, so I'm just going to tell you a serious story. I'm going to tell you a serious story, so don't cry or anything like that. But in my career in the tuna business, I was the head of some political bullshit and stuff like that. And so one day I got a call from Ronald Reagan's office, and they wanted to throw a party on a tuna boat. And so I had to arrange a party in 48 hours on the Carol & M down at Broadway Pier. And I had to find somebody who could put a bar together. Who in the hell? Girard's living with me then down here. So I call him and I say, "Girard, call Sullivan. We need a bar on the Carol & M in 48 hours. They showed up, grandiose, put on a full-on deal for Ronald Reagan. And he went on to become the President of the United States. And he thought Tommy Girard was a great guy. So I'll make a toast. Here, here. Him. Fuck him. God bless you, Tommy. And good night, everybody.